following program on Ada Derana 24 is classified for general audience. It is intended for all ages. It contains little or no violence, no strong language, and little or no sexual dialogue or situations. The following program contains opinions of the participants and does not reflect the views and beliefs of the Derana Media Network. The network believes in a safe space for all ideas to be expressed and on its duty to create such a platform for free speech. Viewer discretion is strictly advised. For a real view, real opinion, and for an honest conversation, it's time to Get Real with Mahieash Johnney. Tonight, coming to you from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Get Real. This time around, right after the budget. The budget was presented to Parliament by the President of this country, Wickramaratne, in his capacity as the head of state, the first budget that he presented. And apparently we wanted to break it down and find out whether did they keep the promises that they made during the election time, and also can this budget actually help the country to grow. Now, one of the things right out of the gate, what we saw was, yes, a lot of allocations were made for digital infrastructure, for education, for this and that, which is something that we see in all budgets. Irrespective of which government, we have been seeing that. But then again, the most important part is it's not about the spending, it's about the income. This mismatch is what every single government is trying to reduce. Now, this time around, that has not happened. And in fact, the government spending, that is the key component which this particular government came to power, saying cutting down on unnecessary expenditure of the government. That has not happened as per the document as well, because apparently those budgets also have increased in a drastic amount. In order to give us an idea as to how this budget will impact the future, I've invited back to the studio former State Finance Minister, Eran Wickramaratne. Welcome back to the program. Good to see you. You just told me you're unemployed, but you're busy. How are you, sir?
Keeping fine. Got some time to reflect more.
Yes.
On what's happening and what should happen. And I think what should happen is very critical, and to actually carefully think through. People in the country have given the new president and the new government a mandate, and I think there are expectations.
A lot of
expectations. Maybe the poor don't have a lot of expectations in the sense of, we'll give you jobs and, what traditional politicians did and ruined the country. Well, lots of expectations, particularly from the middle class, from the business sector, right? That they will be able to actually grow the economy, that there could be prosperity, and then basically the social imbalances, could be also sorted out.
But more importantly, what the people expected from this government was not to govern the way, like they said during the election platforms, on the election platforms, not to govern the country the way it was governed 75 years prior. So they were going to introduce this new system of governance. That's basically what was there.
Yeah, so I would say on the soft factors, I would give them some marks. On the soft factors, being simple, doing away with nonsensical protocol, trying to live it simply. I think I must give them some marks on that, because that's something I must...
Writing from ballpoint pens and all.
Yeah, that's something that my upbringing also promotes, and I strongly recommend that kind of thing. So I think I will give them some plus marks on that, on the soft factors, which are, I think, extremely good. I think ultimately you need to then get into the harder factors. And when you look at the harder factors, they have got a mandate. They are in a, what I would call, in a phase of, like after marriage, you're on the honeymoon.
Yeah.
You're in the honeymoon phase.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And then people who have voted for them naturally expect them to be given a period of time. And I think that's fair as well, to actually see whether they will deliver on what they have promised. Their unique selling proposition, of course, was more, we'll deal with corruption. We'll deal with corruption. And I've always said that I'm 100% for it and will support it very strongly. But ultimately, it's a delivery that will actually matter. The delivery will matter. But getting back into the budget itself, broadly speaking, they kept within the IMF guidelines that had been agreed on. From debt sustainability to fiscal discipline to revenue consolidation. So if you look at the numbers and you look at the percentages, they have very beautifully stayed within it. The question is, when you look at it carefully, expenditures have gone up, and to
income level.
Yeah, the incomes have to be brought in to actually provide those expenditures. So they have said the budget deficit, more or less 25 will be the same as 24, 6.7 as opposed to 6.8. The primary balance will be 2.3, and as opposed to the same last year. So, as I said, the statistics and the figures are within the IMF program. But if
which gives the indication saying that they are sticking with the plan of the IMF.
They are. And so there is a positive to that as well, because you need IMF approval to get the next tranche, right, which is due shortly in a few months, and then you need
it's actually end of April.
Okay, then you need it because it gives you access to the markets, and that depends on your ratings, and your ratings have to keep climbing if you have to have access to the markets. One thing I might say here is that, as I said, we have to look at the hard facts and we have to be realistic. If you look at the revenue numbers they have projected, it goes up by about 900 billion roughly, and that's a lot of revenue to be collected. From the budget proposals, I see about 1/3 of that, about 350 billion will come through VAT. And VAT is an efficient way of collecting taxes, so that will come through. And then you have the balance, 600 or so billion, which has to come from somewhere, you see. And to me, when I look at the budget analytically, it's not very clear how that total sum is going to actually come. Because as you know, there were no income tax increases. There was no wealth tax talked about.
The threshold of those also were changed, like from 100,000 it was brought to 150.
That's right.
And then what the whole idea, what the president said was, if you're earning a lot, then you got to pay a lot, and if you're earning less, then you don't need to pay that. So basically the Robin Hood theory. But based on that, how do you analyze all this?
Yes. So I agree with him to the extent that the working people and the people who go to work every day, and they work from 8 to 6 or whatever, and and they get on a bus or van, and they slug it out. Those people are independent of the state largely, and I have a lot of respect for them, and they look after their families, their children, their education, their parents, grandparents, etc., etc. And they had a very difficult time with 100,000 tax-free threshold. You see, ideally it should have, if it was 200, which was what was promised in the manifesto, I think, but they made it 150. So I think I welcome that move, because you're not making more people dependent on the state, you're getting them out of it. But if I look at it as a total, and as I said, there's a 500, 600 billion, which I can see as that can be a problem. I might be speaking out of turn here. I might say that don't be surprised if you have a second budget, coming in a few months' time, which will have to look at revenue enhancement, right, to bridge that gap, to stay within it.
Which you are alluding to the fact that there could be another shock into the economy in terms of taxation that might come from this so-called second budget, and that it needs to happen, because how else to collect that 600 billion odd?
Yeah. So that's what I actually was alluding to, because you have to stay within the broader macroeconomic framework. So there are only two ways. One is fiscal consolidation based on revenue, and if you are pursuing revenue, you have to do exactly what you were saying. There's no other way. And you can look there at income, and you can look at wealth. So there are two components there. The other is you have to look at it drastically on the expenditure side. So if I might put some suggestions forward, one is the usual, looking at the income taxes and the thresholds and the rates and adjusting it and trying to get more revenue in. That's one. The other is, and the IMF talked about this when they issued their statement, a couple of years ago. They talked about a wealth tax. They talked about wealth tax, property tax, inheritance tax, and so forth and so on in their document, and it's documented. And then we find out that the IMF also has moved away from it, and then they came up with this thing about an imputed rental tax, you say, an imputed rental tax. But without getting into the details of the tax, I would say that if you look at it carefully, right, who likes taxes? Nobody likes taxes, right? So you have to leave that on a side. But if you look at a society, living in harmony, right, with everybody in society is critical. Not having social unrest is critical. So the top 10% of the population, right, have 47% of the income and 64% of the wealth of the country. The bottom 50% of the country have only 4% of the wealth of the country. So this is the drastic thing. And there's a new website called Arutha. You see, we normally hear about Verite and Advocata and all that, but there's a new one called Arutha, and I think some young people are at it, and it's good, and they've especially done some work on the wealth, and they're using international data, and it should be looked at. Right? When you look at that imbalance, right, that has to be rebalanced. Now, generally what people immediately argue when you say wealth, they say in most countries of the world it hasn't worked. There are some countries it has worked. Some countries have tried and it has failed, right? I agree with that. I also agree that it's not easy to implement, right? But I think it can't be ignored. We'll have to look at ways, because to bridge the gap, we'll have to look at ways of actually doing it, and there are ways of doing it. So information is the big issue. Now, if I even say a simple thing like, I don't know, you may be familiar with it, right? And I have seen transactions, right? Let's say you're doing a land transaction, right? And then you have to pay a tax or a stamp duty or whatever. And then the lawyer draws up the whole thing, and then they decide what the value of it. The value they put on the transaction and the actual market value is different. Right? So we have to have a system. You know what I mean?
So then, like, the person who's selling has a separate valuation, and the guy who's buying it has a separate valuation, and then there is this haggle. All that happens. Yes.
All that happens. So clearly, I understand that there are problems on data and information and all that, but we can't use those as excuses anymore. So we'll have to find shortcuts. Now, unfortunately, with using a Millennium Challenge Fund grant, we were setting about doing that and creating the database, digitizing the country's lands and things like that. And then suddenly people got up in the opposition and said, oh, they're trying to divide the country, and what's this nonsense and all that kind of thing. If that was done, the data would have been there already. So what you can do is then you will know in different areas there will be valuations. So it doesn't have to depend on the particular transaction. Taxes could be based on the valuations, as long as it's done objectively and said this is the amount of taxes that are actually required and has to be recouped. So there are ways of doing it. So I'm saying it can't be ignored, and particularly to this government, I have to say it. I mean, lots of people in this government fought on the streets for decades, about social justice and things like that. right? And so I'm saying you just can't ignore it.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it from a fiscal point of view, not just a social justice point of view. From a fiscal point of view, you have to basically make sure that your budget is being balanced. We have to get rid of the problem we've had for 75 years. Only in 5 years we had a primary surplus, right? 2 years is when Mangala and I were in the ministry, 2017-18. And since then, it's been difficult with the economy growing, and the economy has been stagnant, so they have cut down expenditure.
The projection the president mentioned during his speech of growth for this year is at 5%. That is a very high number from where we came from up unto 5% of growth.
Yeah.
We're talking about rates prior to 2015, growth rates. So since 2015, I believe, then it kept on dipping, and then again 2019 it picked up a little bit, but then again 2022 went on into the minus areas, and now the president saying 5%. But the 5% growth is again, you have to again let the private sector take the lead and basically allow them to grow. So this taxation portion, which we have not yet heard from this particular budget, and the way that they are going to collect this revenue, I'm sure it'll come, like you said, in few months' time. That particular part is now going to get banked solely on the private sector, because the state sector is not the area where they'll be generating a lot of income. So you have to go to where the money is in order to get the money. So when that happens, then Sri Lanka once again becomes a very unattractive place for business, because high taxation means when you have options all around the region, Bangladesh, India, Maldives, all these areas, when there are literary options, investors are not again going to look at. So we're going to go to square one once again. So how do we come out of that loop? Because we can't let we can't make the private sector throttle them in order to get taxation out so that they can't grow. And one of the reason I'm bringing this up is during on the 14th of February, we had a discussion about that. And one of the things that came from the private sector was saying that way too many taxes, and not just one tax, layered tax. So you get taxed like 4 or 5 times for the same thing. So those kinds of things, has it been looked at in this particular budget document so that we will allow the private sector to grow and dictate the market?
So certainly, as I said, the private sector doesn't want higher and higher taxes. I think the finance minister went out of his way to try to encourage the private sector. I think to be fair by him, in his words, there was a transformation. I'm all for transformation, whether it's philosophical, religious, economic, social, whatever it is, that people can change. And so when you listen to him now and you listen to him before, there was a transformation. It's a positive thing. I see it as a positive thing that he has recognized the fact that wealth and incomes have to be created by individuals and the private sector. And I would applaud him for that, because that's very, very important that he has made that move, because there is an understanding in this country now that how this country can be taken forward is only through that. And it's very important to publicly recognize this. It's very important for us to actually say, you've done the right thing, that's the right direction to go. So I'm saying his intentions are extremely good. Now the question is converting the intentions into action and into practice. So as you said, obviously taxes, you have to look at it very, very carefully, because it can be a disincentive. Some taxes worldwide has shown that they haven't been a disincentive. It's the other factors that have stopped foreign investment coming in. And I would tell the government to focus on those factors, in actually changing those factors. And then we're looking at revenue. If I were to just to shift to expenditure for a moment, right? And I'm going to throw some ideas, because I have been trying to do this for a decade. some of these things, and they haven't been taken. I want to again say well done on the government. I've been saying for a decade that you need, on the law side, a public, independent public prosecutor. You see, you can't have the Attorney General, and I've used this example over and over again. I'm the minister today. AJ is my advisor, my lawyer. Tomorrow I steal. My lawyer has to go and put a case against me. It just doesn't happen. It's a conflict of interest. You need an independent public prosecutor. I pushed it, and I'm so glad to hear that they are going to create an independent public prosecutor. Now there's something else that they need to do. And this affects the private sector and investment. And it is to do with labor, right? Yeah. Sri Lanka has one of the largest, right, public sectors for any country. One of the largest.
That's where I was, let me just interject there. Now, that is where my question lies. You applauded to the president saying, yeah, you recognize the private sector. But then, in that same budget document, first you say, I'm going to digitize the country, 5,000 billion rupees investment or something really huge amount invested there. Then in that same budget says 30,000 people will be given state sector employment. So contradicting all around. So if you are saying the digital sector is coming up, that means the overhead component has to go low, especially in the state sector. And one thing, when we talk to the investment entrepreneurial minister Chaturanga Besinga, they say, we want to get out from business. The government wants to get out from doing business. We want to let the private sector do the business. Very good idea. But then it does not reflect is what my argument is, because you're saying, yes, we want to do this. And then in the same breath you say the contradicting portion of it. So mismatch.
Yeah, so what you say is correct. And this is why I would suggest to the government, go further. You say, the 30,000 new employees you want to take, I agree. There may be gaps, certain skills are needed, particularly, I know for sure, like financial skills are lacking in government, right? So you need it, the 30,000 people coming in. I'm talking about more drastic things which didn't come out in the budget. What you actually need to do is to rationalize the public sector. You're just ducking it. You can't duck it. You have to face up to it, and you have to rationalize the public sector. For 7 decades, right, politicians in this country of all political parties, but mainly the JVP and the socialist parties, have talked about the rights of workers. Yeah. Nobody has talked about the rights of consumers and citizens in this country. It's citizens that are important. I can have a job till I'm 55, 60, 65 years or whatever. After that I go home and I'm there for 30 more years. Even the public office that I have, the doors I have walked through, after I retire, they are not welcoming me anymore. So everybody needs to remember, even if I'm a public servant, right, there's a limit to that. I'm really a citizen, and I'm really a consumer. And the consumer needs the highest level of service and products at the lowest possible price. This principle, they must accept. If they accept this principle, you will rationalize the public service. And we didn't hear anything of that in the budget. I'm saying that, putting that on the table now, saying that we need to hear that, in the next round. Rationalizing. How do you rationalize it? If you take that you have, let's say, 1.5 million employees. So there are various studies that have been done. What is the number? Is it 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever the number is? So it can be 1 lakh, 2 lakhs, 3 lakhs, or whatever the numbers is. And what it's going to show is that those people are not necessary to increase efficiency. They will reduce the cost of it, right, the public service in the country, and they'll reduce. You can deal with it, and I'll throw the ideas. You can deal with it humanly. I'll tell them, basically, scientifically it needs to be done. Whatever that number is, don't come to work from tomorrow. I'm sending your salary home for the next...
You're basically telling what is right now, in example, happening in America. The American workforce, the Doge and Donald Trump basically told the government employees, y'all are too much, we can't take the budget, y'all are breaking our budgets. Here is a nice severance package. Or if you take it now, you'll get all the benefits. And if you're listing it, if not, we will have to be looking at cutting it down and bringing it to size of and that this is where this entire conversation about so you're basically saying what is right now in exemplary happening in the most powerful nation in the world.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is the economic principle may be the same. The implementation can be different.
Yeah, exactly.
And we are fully understanding, right, the humanitarian aspect of it, fully understanding it. So you send them their salary home for a year. You tell them, go and get new employment. Then you take a portion of the savings and you put it on training and into vocational training. Then people find employment in two ways. Some people might find employment overseas. Some people will go into the private sector of the country. And that's a boost to the private sector of the country, because the private sector can then, they have the labor that is required. And for these people, it becomes a supplementary income, during that period of time. I would even go further. I would even say that, and politicians won't say it like I'm saying it, I would even say that about the armed forces. Right? We need to look at it rationally. Defense is number one. There is no question about that principle. But today, defense, right? Because we are never going to be at war, right, with the big powers around us, the geopolitical powers around us. We're never going to be at war with India or with China or something like that. We are a small island. This is not a new issue. Geopolitics is a new issue for this country. Issues we are facing today, our kings 2,000 years ago faced them. They dealt with them. Those issues are not going to change 2,000 years from now either. We are always going to be small. How do we succeed? We succeed by being clever, by being able to negotiate a winning position for the citizens of our country. And similarly, what you need is investment in intelligence, and you need investment in technology for the armed forces. So I'm not talking about cutting investment in defense.
Yeah.
I'm talking about redeploying it in intelligence and in technology, taking the workforce back and putting the workforce into economic production is what I'm talking about.
Indeed. Let's take a short commercial break. A lot more to discuss with regard to the 2025 budget, which was presented on Monday by His Excellency the President. The former State Finance Minister, Eran Wickramaratne, is here with me, basically giving his ideas about the budget. And one of the things that he highlighted, this has been a conversation throughout a lot of administrations. Even when y'all were in power, we were talking about this redistribution of employment from the state sector to the private sector. Haven't been able to get it done in an effective manner all throughout the years, and we've been facing a lot of crises since then. But let's talk more on that right after this break. You're watching Get Real with Eran. Welcome back, everyone, to Get Real. I'm in conversation with former State Minister of Finance, Eran Wickramaratne, dissecting the current budget that was presented in Parliament on Monday. And we've been trying to talk about the areas where the government, the State Minister had a lot of ideas where the government can refine itself in terms of basically bringing in more revenue and also structurally changing, because the current government has that mandate, which most administration didn't. Right now, they can actually, if they want to make a change for the next 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, they can do it right now. They can change the laws, they can change the administrative processes and actually make an impact that would enhance our growth as a nation, which we've been talking for donkey's years now, and we are still not growing, and that is a tragedy for this country. Former Minister, with regard to Now, there are areas which the government said we have to invest, and digital side was something that was quite talked about. And then we have Dr. Hans Surya leading that entire initiative. What exactly do you think with that, looking at the budget document and exactly that? Because when you all were in power also, you all were talking about digitizing Sri Lanka. What does that mean? Because if you ask the digital experts in this country from the digital sector, they're going to say you guys are doing something utterly useless that is going to be redundant in another 5 years, 6 years. You're not thinking ahead. You're doing something for the moment, maybe like, computerizing a system that will become like now we see in the passport issue, the national ID issue, all these came. But you are not thinking ahead, what will be relevant in 10 years' time, what will be relevant in 25 years' time. Because the argument was, we can't invest 5,000 billion rupees this year, and in another 5 years, again another 5,000, because this particular system you just generated is redundant by that time around. So there is a forward-thinking element which is missing. So when you all wanted to do this also, and with the current budget, how do you see this particular process?
Yeah, so I would be more optimistic because digitalization is necessary. How you define it, different people might have different views about it, but even getting the fundamentals done and the basics done, like for example, having a unique ID, right, for people. It allows basically with information gathering, it allows with transactions, it allows with creating a more open society based on, of course, privacy laws, etc., etc. It creates that, and then taking it further and trying to reduce the cash transactions in the economy to transactions that you can actually track and trace. And even in the anti-corruption fight, that will help. And there are lots of things that you can do on the anti-corruption fight. One is through transactions being non-cash. Then, of course, lots of other things. Laws will have to be there. Then cross-border information sharing. There's there's voluntary information sharing, and there is also requested information sharing. There are different methods that can be used. So it helps in that sense as well. Then digitization, as I said in the example earlier, I used on land, transactions and databases and all. It will help. Then digitization, apart from helping in actually requiring services from the government, whether it's your passport, your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, simple things, you see, it'll help in increasing efficiency and things like that.
Let me interject there for Minister now. One of the things that came up from the discussion which I spoke to you earlier about on our 50th episode of State of the Nation was the fact that this data came out in that discussion. Over 60% of people in this country are still cash-based, which means they don't understand the digitization aspect of it. Now, if you take my purse and look at it, it doesn't have a single a currency.
Yes.
Not because of anything else, because I do all my transactions and everything on my mobile and digital processes is what I depend upon. Now that is happening here in this part of the nation. But in the other part of the nation, I think the figure they put out was around 80% of the people, 60 to 80% of the people still wants hard cash in their hand. They take to the bank and they take it out from the bank. None of those digital. So the education aspect is also quite crucial in this component if we are to digitize.
So one of the biggest challenges the digitization program will have is actually the cultural transformation, because you're dealing with people, and you're absolutely right, the challenge will be there. I remember about 20 years ago, closer to 25 years ago, we started this. I was then a banker, and on the request of the then government, saying how do you use information technology, how do you use it? And Dr. Hans, Professor Rohan Samarajiva, there were quite a few people, Jonathan Fernando came in We recruited Manju Hattotua, from the private sector. We had Dias from the University of Moratuwa. There are quite a few people whose all names I can't actually recollect. A lot of people came in, and we started what we call the East Sri Lanka program, right? And when we the reason I just mentioned that is when we started it, is internet usage was absolutely low. The mobile telephone usage was actually low. If you look at it today, it's transformed really it's transformed very highly. So, but still, given that, there's still a group that doesn't use it. At that time, we went for the digital kiosk, because people didn't have the instruments, neither the computer nor the phone. So we created the mobile kiosk, and that was also created on a private sector model, you see. Unfortunately, we went that route, in fact got assistance from the World Bank. The East Sri Lanka program at that time was the first of its kind for the World Bank, and it's become a model program, and now they have even published a book on it. The person who was responsible in the World Bank, the consultant, has come up with a book on. He's using 5 countries. Sri Lanka is one of the main case studies in it. So I'm saying even today, those different challenges are there, but we have to go that route. And I think the people working on it, right, Hans and his team and all, will be very sensitive to those issues, right, in actually helping them to convert themselves. And it will happen. It will take time. There will be issues. There will be cultural transformation issues. But I think there's no question that we definitely should go that route and start investing. Then apart from the digitalization, also it was mentioned in the budget speech that ICT exports, right, of any kind, right, which should be increased. So I don't know what the exact figure today is. It's probably 1 plus 1.5 billion or whatever the figure on exports, right, to up to 5 billion, right. Now, it's quite a high number, I would say, on my immediate reflection, right? But as I said, it gets coupled with a lot of things. If we release people into the labor market, one, and if we train people through vocational training. Now, releasing people to the labor market, one of the things that I would have liked to have seen in the budget, which was not there, is women. Right, so you have lots of women basically in education. Now if you take universities, most faculties there are more women than men. If you take professional education, largely women than men. So there's a huge educated labor force, right? And then they get married and then they go on leave. Then when it comes to employment, the private sector, right? If both are equal, I generally would hire the man rather than the woman who has come for the interview, because the cost to the company is less because there's no maternity leave. So I've been advocating that government should pick the bill for paid maternity leave for the private sector. It doesn't cost too much. When we first started advocating it, it was like about 4 billion rupees. Now it's about 7-8 billion rupees. It's still worth it because you're going to release a lot of women into the economy. And a lot of them, right, because they're educated, will very easily take up on the technology side as well. And it will really help. So that's another practical thing that should be done. So the labor force is there, an educated labor force is there, releasing them for economic advantage. And the advantage is not just to them, the advantage is to all of us if those women are in the labor force, right? So that's something that I would suggest to the government to relook at that and see how you can actually release more people.
Earlier you talked about taxations, and you said that there would be another version of the budget that might come in a couple of months' time. In my opinion, it might be after the election that we are supposed to have. In a situation like that, what exactly kind of taxations are you expecting? Because in order to cover that 600 odd the budget deficit, which you earlier spoke about, I don't think taxation alone can bring that amount. Because if that is the case, then it's going to be a heavy taxation system and a cost to the people of this country, which I don't think would be a prudent move to make, especially at a crucial place where the country's salary schemes of whether the state or the private sector is not in par with their expenditure. So what kind of taxations are you actually thinking that the government might bring in?
Yeah, so as I suggested, in one way or the other, they will have to look at wealth in one way or the other. Some things you can't implement because of the lack of information, etc., etc. Some things you may have to take a shortcut. Some things may be more assessment-driven wealth taxes. And now there was a study, and I looked at it, on the assessment-driven wealth taxes, which is local government. So one reason maybe the IMF and the government has backed down from it is because there are different levels of government: central government, provincial government, local government, and so forth. But what I'm saying is there are ways of handling that. Because even if it's provincial or even if it's a local government taxation, you still can implement it. Because what I tell them is, right, you take that tax and the central government grant to you, I'm going to cut it.
Okay.
So then they become responsible on the ground, not just for expenditure, they become responsible for revenue as well. You see, so I looked at, projected revenue from assessment taxes of some municipalities and some Pradeshia Sabhavas, and generally their collections are much lower than their assessments. I might say this: the Kurunegala Municipal Council has done relatively well compared to the rest, and the Ampara Municipal Council also has
this data is when
this data is also available in some of these studies, and I saw that in the
which year
wealth analysis. This is the latest in the last, from like 2017 to 2024.
Okay.
Right, the data is there. Right, I saw it in that latest. I said that Aruta had put down a wealth tax report. This data was also there, and I looked at that as well. So what I'm trying to say is that is one of the things. But I think they'll have to go in for looking at expenditure. And this is something that surprised me. When I was in the ministry and we negotiated with the IMF, we did fiscal consolidation based on revenue. I was surprised when they came for the second program that they also did it based on revenue and didn't look at expenditure. So one big area in expenditure is state-owned enterprises.
Yeah.
Right, and there's a lot to be done there. And I think the government needs to face up to it. Right, they have taken some very positive measures in this budget. They have to go much further, much further. On state-owned enterprises, there was hardly anything in this budget.
I think that would be the indicator that you said that there might be another version coming out very soon. But before that, let's take a short break. I'm in conversation with former State Minister of Finance, Eran Wickramaratne, with regard to the current budget, the budget 2025, which was released to the public by the President himself on Monday. We'll be right back. To get real, I'm in conversation with former State Minister of Finance, Eran Wickramaratne, with regard to the current budget that was released to the public. We are dissecting the information that was given, whether it's in line with the growth process and whether Sri Lanka can actually see some kind of stability within our financial sector, with our economy. All that. One of the areas that you touched upon prior to the break was the small and medium enterprises sector, SMEs plus the SOEs. SOEs is basically every government's curse that keeps coming back to haunt them. So this time around, what exactly are you proposing? Because there was nothing much said in this particular budget, this version of the budget. But what exactly are you advocating to the government on this?
So, the government has gone around putting private sector people in trying to reform, state-owned enterprises, and I think that's a very welcome move. But I would say this, having come from the private sector into the public sector and also been in Parliament, observing this over a period of time, you appoint a new board, and generally they're very enthusiastic and they want to turn things around, and they come and put a proposal. Right, and they also come to the conclusion that everybody previous to them have mismanaged it, and now they're going to manage it properly, and that's not always true. So I'm very happy for the new people who are coming in and actually trying to get the management side sorted out. But the problem with state-owned enterprises is not only a management issue; it's a structural issue. And if you take Sri Lankan Airlines as an example. The management issue can be solved by putting the right people, and I think they have put some very good people at the moment in trying to see how to shift things from the management side, make it more efficient, so forth and so on. Structural issues. The government announces we're giving 20 billion rupees this year for Sri Lankan Airlines, right, to deal with historical issues.
I know this is a pet subject to you when it comes to Sri Lankan Airlines, because you have studied inside out when you were the state minister on that as well. What is the real issue there? Because Sri Lankan Airlines is a national carrier that has the ability to basically reach really new heights. We had Emirates with us. We've been looking for a partner. Not a single person came with a serious bidding to take over the entire services sector of that. So now the government is saying, no, we are not going to sell it. We're going to, and then they pump some exuberant amount of money from this particular budget as well. So why isn't Sri Lankan Airlines not working when, in terms of, if you take Singapore Airlines, forget about Singapore, certain regional airlines of India is working, and we can't get our national carrier to fly high.
Yeah, so there are two fundamental principles. One principle is government in business and in management. You put good people, it'll run well. When the good people are gone, it goes back. So you need to make a structural change. That is why I advocate private sector management, even at Sri Lankan Airlines, structurally changing it. Not the minister appointing people, which is what we have all done, which also what Honorable Kumara Dissanayake, President, is also doing. I'm saying go beyond that, to make sure that the structure is changed permanently, that it's private sector who always manages. Government has no say in it. Government can have ownership in it. That's a different matter. And that can be done. There are ways in which it could be done. You can have an investor, you can have a local investor, foreign investor, whatever, look at it structurally. Other is dealing with basically the deficits and the loans and things like that. The government puts some money in, which is a good signal, but you'll have to put 6 to 10 times that amount eventually. And the government will not be able to do that. I can say that up front. It will not be able to do that. So I'm saying management, I have full confidence that the new people can actually take care of that and make it operationally feasible and all, but dealing with the structure. Government can't completely absorb all the losses either, because government has to manage its macroeconomy on all state-owned enterprises, not just Sri Lankan Airlines. So it has a huge problem. So you have to look at solutions outside, and you have to get the private sector involved. I'm saying that because otherwise we are going to see a replay. The people change and a replay. Private sector involvement, if I can just say one more thing, right? And this is why I think the structural things, and the budget was a bit silent on this. On education, lots of things were said, right? There's limitations on what the government can actually spend, and I agree with that given the tightness of the budget. But I would like to hear something like the supply of education. The private sector is needed. It's needed, and these people need to come to terms with it. We need private medical schools, which they have objected to in the past.
But apparently they're warming to that idea now.
Great. We need private nursing schools, because there's a global demand for nursing, not just sending housemaids abroad and just workers, but we need to send skilled workers and training and vocational training, and we need to do that. In the supply of that, let's come to terms with it. Government does what it does. Private sector and non-government, non-profit distributing sector in education worldwide has become very, very important. And I would have liked to hear something like that, but I didn't hear it in this round. But I hope in the next round we will hear it. That's the way forward for this country.
Absolutely. Well, time is basically becoming a hindrance to our discussion. There's a lot more to discuss with regard to this budget, and I sincerely hope that the next round, if there is going to be another round of a budget version that is to come, that it's not going to be filled with taxations and shocks to the people of this country, because I don't think they are capable of we really need to go to the structure where, quality stuff, lowest price, which you earlier spoke on. Former State Minister of Finance Eran Wickramaratne, appreciate it. Please keep coming back and sharing your thoughts on the current administrations. So you have 5 years to talk about. I'm pretty sure you'll be getting back to politics after that. But then again, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that's all the time we have for you tonight. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Get Real. I'll be back again next Friday with another episode. We'll be speaking to, if confirmed, we are still having issues in terms of getting the schedules right. But if confirmed, the Economic Development Minister, the Deputy Minister of Economic Development will be here. So he also can respond what the government is talking about with regard to the budget and proceeding ahead with that. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.
The greatest day of our lives. Today this could be the greatest day.